wonderful speakers have mentioned, we have a bit of a tax crisis in Minnesota. The last two biennial budgets went up by 12.4% and 9.8% respectively. Did your income go up double digits the last 4 years? Then why should theirs? And that wasn't enough. We spent last year's surplus, $2.2 billion. You know, if we would have saved last year's surplus and had a budget that was smaller because of it, we'd have a surplus today, not a $1 billion deficit. But we spent last year's surplus, and that wasn't enough. We added $6.6 billion more this year. And I got bad news for you. That's not going to be enough. It will never be enough for these people until we say no. There was no effort to replace this tax increase for transportation. How many of you took light rail here today, by the way?
See anybody?
Obviously none of you did, because you wouldn't have made it on time had you done it. You know, we could have bonded for the transportation bill if you wanted to spend that kind of money, but we didn't. We reserved that for pork and bike trails and ski jumps and hockey arenas, appropriate today. Polar bear exhibits, appropriate today. And yet we still keep saying we're undertaxed in Minnesota. Now I'm going to tell you something that's going to traumatize the news media. According to the United States Census, and I hope a few local news anchors are listening here, if you measure the state government's revenues, the state government, what they take in, we are the 6th highest per capita tax state in the country. And after this year, we're probably going to be 4th or 5th. I think enough is enough, wouldn't you say? You know, and it's funny, this is all about a debate over your budget versus the government's budget. I happen to think you can spend your money a bit more wisely than they can. And yet, Larry Poggemiller, the state Senate leader, it isn't lunch yet, is it? All right. I can mention a Democrat. You know, I've got a little problem with vertigo lately, and I just finally figured it out. The Democrats are making me dizzy. But he said it's naive and simplistic to think that you can spend your money more efficiently than the government. By the way, I haven't even mentioned, I know Michelle and John did, but what they've got in store at the federal level. If the Bush tax cuts expire, 115 million taxpayers are going to see their taxes go up. And the bottom bracket is going to go up by 50%. The top bracket's going up. Every bracket's going up. The marriage penalty's going up. The child care credit is going away. 115 million taxpayers, $1.9 trillion of new taxes over 7 years, and that's just if the Bush tax cuts expire. But that's not enough. Barack Obama wants to spend $1.4 trillion more over the next 5 years, $300 billion a year. Now, in 1980, we had a federal budget of $580 billion. By 1990, it was $1 trillion. By 2000, $2 trillion. Today, it's $3 trillion. The government's budget has gone up 50% in Washington. Here in Minnesota, since 2002, the state budget has gone up 30%. And these idiots are talking about carving the budget up? They're talking about breaking the budget to the bone? What planet are they living on? Then again, they're talking about global warming, so obviously it's not this planet. You know, these politicians responsible for this, if they had any shame at all, quite frankly, they'd resign. And shall we make it official? Shall we call for their resignations? And I wouldn't blame the good ones if they quit in protest. But I'm telling you, further tax hikes are being planned as we speak today. They'll say they need your income for vital spending programs, but they can't spend your income wiser than you. They'll say they need to keep borrowing for government investment. That's called an oxymoron. There's no such thing. But they can't invest your income any wiser than you. Whose money is it? I'm sorry? Come again? This redistribution of wealth is really a zero-sum game, folks. Government can't invest without first consuming, and they take from you. They can't spend without taxing or borrowing. It all comes out of your pocket. And guess what? The spending and the taxes do very, very little for production. You're left with a lower standard of living, and society is left with a lower gross domestic product. We do not have a spending crisis in Minnesota or America. The money that we earn will be spent. The question is, who's going to do the spending? Those folks or you? Since the elections of 2006, big spending Democrats and a few liberal Republicans, and you're doing something about those guys, aren't you? They've had nearly complete control. They've had the old enchilada. They've had everything since 2006. They have virtually had a free hand. And all they could think to do with it is to stick it in your pocket. And enough is enough. Now, you know, you got to wonder at some point, how do they still justify taxing you when taxes are so high? And it's really quite easy. You've still got some money left. And as long as you do, they're going to keep coming back and back and back. They don't realize that it's government's role to protect property. They think it's government's role to redistribute property. So let us commit today to dispense with the shop-worn slogans. We've got to actually get a little tougher, believe it or not. No new taxes isn't good enough anymore. Holding the line isn't good enough anymore. When you're bleeding to death, somebody yelling no new wounds isn't going to cut it. The fact of the matter is, we need tax reduction, and we need it now. Some apologists will tell you, well, Minnesota's always going to be a high-tax state. Nothing we can do about it. Do you think that's true? And let me ask you to continue this crusade. Let me thank you and all the great speakers here for coming. It's been a wonderful turnout on a really nasty day. So let me ask you to continue this. You can join one of these great groups. You can keep fighting. You can support those you trust. And you can vow to defeat those you don't. For in the final analysis, my friends, taxes are a moral issue. They're not really an economic one. The right to own